Hi, I'm Milas. My mother once told my brother, "Don't worry, she's never said no to family." And she was right. I didn't say no when they took my savings, or when they forged my name on loans, or when they made me believe love meant sacrifice. But the day I overheard them planning to let me take the fall to send me to prison for his crimes, that was the day something inside me snapped. They thought I'd stay silent. They thought I'd keep giving. But what I did next cost them everything. Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever been betrayed by the people you loved most? Let me know in the comments. I'm listening. I pulled the lasagna out of the oven, steam rising as the scent of garlic and basil settled into the kitchen. I'd spent Saturday prepping the sauce, chopping tomatoes, letting them simmer down while I balanced calls for work. Sundays were for this, for showing up with something warm in my hands, even when my body begged me to rest after another 70-hour week at the firm. It was the one way I felt close to them, the one thing I could offer that felt like love. I wrapped the pan in 2 thick towels and slid it onto the passenger seat, glancing at the clock on my dashboard. It was nearly 5, dusk settling over Seattle, rain misting the windshield. As I drove through familiar streets, the glow of the streetlights blurred with the drizzle, each intersection a reminder of the life I'd built on routines that made me feel needed. My mother always said I was dependable, the one who never missed a Sunday dinner, even when I was buried under deadlines. When I pulled up in front of the house I grew up in, the porch light was already on. That light had always meant they were waiting for me, that someone inside cared I was coming home. I let the engine idle, letting the warmth of the car cradle me before stepping out, clutching the lasagna close to my chest. The wind was cold, sharper than I expected, the sky a gray bruise overhead. I climbed the steps, pausing as I always did on the third one that creaked, holding my breath as the sound broke the quiet. I reached for the screen door, ready to push it open, when I heard voices drifting from the kitchen. My mother's voice, calm, coaxing, the same tone she used when she told me everything would be okay when Dad lost his job years ago, when she told me I was strong enough to handle anything. "Don't worry, she's never said no to family." I froze. The lasagna shifted in my grip, the heat seeping into my palms, grounding me when everything else felt like it tilted. "She'll cover it, Kieran. She always does. She's got that big job, no husband, no kids. What else is she gonna spend it on?" My brother's voice, casual, as if he was talking about taking the last piece of bread, not about taking parts of my life. "You know how bad this could get if the IRS digs deeper. We need her to handle it, or it's prison. She won't let that happen to you." Prison. For him. Paid for by me. My heart thudded, loud enough I was sure they'd hear it. I felt the warmth of the lasagna like a burn, the smell of garlic suddenly sickening. I had shown up every Sunday. I had wired money when they said they needed help with repairs, with medical bills, with emergencies that never seemed to end. And they were planning for me to clean up his mess again, to save him from the consequences of his own choices, like it was my job to fix what he kept breaking. Inside, my mother sighed. "She'll say yes. She always says yes." I stepped back from the door, the wood cool against my back as I leaned into it, needing something to hold me up. I looked down at the lasagna, at the way the sauce had bubbled over the edge, staining the towel. I thought about how many times I'd made it, how many Sunday mornings I'd woken up early to shop for ingredients, thinking it was love, thinking it was enough. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as a solution. I moved slowly down the steps, careful not to let the third one creak this time. The cold air bit at my face as I crossed the yard, the lasagna heavier with every step. When I reached the car, I sat down in the driver's seat, setting the pan on my lap, staring at the house I thought was home. My phone buzzed, lighting up the dark interior. "Where are you, sweetie? Dinner's ready." I stared at the message, the words blurring as tears I didn't want to shed threatened to spill. My thumb hovered over the keyboard before I typed back. "Sorry. Emergency audit at work. Can't make it." 3 dots blinked, then disappeared. I didn't wait for another reply. I started the engine, the lasagna still on my lap, the scent filling the car as I pulled away from the curb, the porch light glowing in my rearview mirror until I turned the corner. I didn't know where I was driving. I just knew I couldn't go back there tonight, not after what I'd heard. The rain picked up, tapping against the windshield as I gripped the wheel, replaying their words in my mind. She's never said no. They were right about that. I had never said no. Until now. I eased the car into drive, the lasagna cooling on the seat beside me as I pulled away from the curb. The rain came down in thin needles against the windshield, blurring the streetlights into streaks of gold as I turned onto the main road, every breath catching in my chest as my mother's words replayed in my mind. She's never said no to family. The phrase looped with the same dull thud as my wipers, clearing away droplets that kept returning, relentless. I didn't head straight home. I drove past the grocery store where I'd bought ingredients that morning, past the little park where I used to walk after Sunday dinners, hoping to ease the heaviness that always settled after leaving their house. Tonight, I had nowhere to place that weight except within myself, and it made the steering wheel feel slippery under my palms. By the time I pulled into my building's garage, the lasagna was stone cold, the towels around it damp with condensation. I didn't bother taking it upstairs. I just left it there, shutting the car door a little too hard as I made my way to the elevator, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering as if they too were tired of trying to brighten the dark. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my shoes, dropping my keys onto the kitchen counter, the sound sharp in the quiet. I didn't turn on the lights right away, standing in the dim glow from the streetlights outside, letting my eyes adjust. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Hair damp, eyes too wide, shoulders tight as if bracing for a blow that hadn't yet landed. I walked into my small office, the scent of stale coffee and paper surrounding me as I flicked on the lamp. The light fell on stacks of files I'd been meaning to sort, reminders of the life I had carefully built for myself. Every bill paid on time. Every penny earned by working twice as hard because I believed it meant something, that it meant I was a good daughter, a good sister. I pulled open a drawer, dragging out a stack of folders I hadn't looked at in months. I wasn't sure what I was searching for at first, just that I needed to see something that made sense, something that would ground me. I found envelopes I had ignored, thinking they were the usual statements, the same routine paperwork that never required urgent attention. But one envelope stood out, thicker than the others, the seal already torn as if someone else had opened it before me. My name was typed across the top of a letter from the IRS, words like delinquent and unreported jumping off the page, each one a small cut across the illusion I had of being in control, a loan I had never taken, a debt I had never agreed to. My name signed in a handwriting that was almost mine, but not quite. I sank down into my chair, the paper shaking in my grip as I read and reread the lines that accused me of owing thousands in taxes on money I had never seen. My mind flickered back to a day Kieran had shown up at my office, asking me to sign something for him. "Just a quick favor?" he'd said, flashing that easy smile that always made me feel like refusing would make me cruel. "It's nothing, just paperwork for a client. You're the best, May." I remembered how he had watched me sign, the way he had patted my shoulder after, telling me how grateful he was, how proud Mom and Dad were of me for helping, for always helping. I pressed the paper to my forehead, closing my eyes as I let the sting of betrayal settle in, heavy and cold. It wasn't enough that they wanted me to clean up his latest mess. He had already set me up to take the fall if it went wrong, to carry the blame while he slipped away untouched. The anger started as a low pulse under my skin, a quiet heat that spread through the shock like a sunrise pushing back the dark. I stood up, walking to the kitchen to pour a glass of water I didn't drink, just holding it to steady my hands as I breathed in and out, letting the fury take shape. I went back to the office and started pulling every file I could find, every receipt, every text and email I had from the past 5 years that said, "Thanks, May," or "Can you cover this just for now?" I opened a new spreadsheet on my laptop, the screen bright against the shadows, and began logging every dollar, every check, every transaction I had made in the name of family. Each entry felt like a small betrayal I had ignored, a truth I hadn't wanted to see because it was easier to believe I was helping out of love than to admit I was being used. As the list grew, so did the weight on my chest, but the fear that had paralyzed me in the car was shifting now, sharpening into something else. Resolve. My phone started buzzing, Kieran's name lighting up the screen over and over, the vibration loud in the quiet room. I watched it ring, letting it go to voicemail, then ring again. His persistence used to make me feel needed. Tonight, it felt like a chain I was about to break. I placed the papers on the kitchen counter, staring at the signatures that weren't mine, the proof of what I was finally willing to see. This was just the beginning. The papers sat there on the counter, silent but screaming as I moved through my kitchen, trying to find something, anything, to anchor me to the moment. I rinsed out the coffee mug from last night, the warm water steaming up around my hands, but even that small comfort couldn't push away the sense of betrayal sitting heavy in my chest. Sleep never came. Instead, I found myself pacing the living room, watching the sky lighten from black to charcoal to the pale gray of dawn pushing through Seattle's endless drizzle. I made coffee because it was the one thing I could control, standing at the window as raindrops traced paths down the glass, the smell of the brew grounding me while my mind spun. Every sip took me back to that birthday years ago, the one where Mom handed me a small, carefully wrapped box after everyone else had left. Inside was a handkerchief with my name stitched along the edge, neat pink letters on soft white cotton. "You're my strong girl," she'd whispered, pressing a kiss to my forehead, her eyes warm with pride. I had believed it then, believed that love meant giving, that family was worth every sacrifice, that the tiredness from working double shifts and the empty bank accounts were proof I was doing the right thing. Standing in my kitchen now, I saw how those moments weren't gifts. They were bindings, little knots of guilt tied around my ribs, pulling tighter every time I said yes to another favor, every time I let my family's needs overshadow my own life. My phone rang, jarring me out of the memory. Mom's name glowed on the screen, her face smiling in the tiny contact photo I hadn't changed in years. I let it ring once, twice before I answered. "Mylis, sweetie." Her voice trembled, a practiced quiver that was supposed to sound worried, soft. "Your brother, he's in trouble, again." I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me, familiar as the sound of the rain. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, though I already knew it didn't matter. "He needs your help," she said, her tone shifting to that edge of expectation I had grown up recognizing. "You don't have a family of your own, May. You can do this for him, for us. It's what family does." It hit me then, how those words had always landed like a command disguised as love. I stood in the kitchen, the warmth from the coffee fading in my palms, listening to her paint him as the victim, as if I owed him my life because I had never needed to call in help the way he did. I could hear Kieran's voice behind her, muffled but there, feeding her lines like, "Tell her it's urgent. Tell her she's the only one we can count on." I ended the call without agreeing, placing the phone face down on the counter, my reflection in the black screen tired but alert. I took a slow breath, letting the guilt pass through me without sticking, without pulling me back into the cycle. My heart drummed steady as I turned on my laptop, the glow of the screen sharp in the dim light of the morning. If they wanted me to clean up Kieran's mess again, I needed to know just how deep it went this time. I opened the credit report site, the cursor blinking as I entered my information, each click a small rebellion against the version of myself who would have ignored the problem to keep the peace. The report loaded, line after line of numbers, accounts I didn't recognize, debts I had never taken on. Each entry had my name, but the dates traced back to phone calls from Mom, texts from Kieran asking for quick favors. Just sign this moments where I trusted them, where I thought I was helping family. One loan, then another and another. Credit cards I had never used, all maxed out. Small business loans taken in my name, the amounts adding up until I felt my stomach twist, nausea climbing up as I realized the truth. My family hadn't just used me for help. They had stolen from me, piece by piece, with smiles and soft words and thank yous that now rang hollow. I opened a blank document, naming it Truth, my fingers steady as I began to list every debt, every date, every moment I remembered signing something because they asked. I pulled up my call logs, my emails, cross-referencing the dates with the debts on the report, building a timeline of betrayal masked as family need. It was methodical, almost cold, but it was the only way to keep the anger from boiling over. I wouldn't let them see me break. Not now. My phone buzzed, pulling my eyes away from the screen. A message from Kieran flashed across. "We need to talk tonight. Family dinner. No excuses." For a moment, the old fear rose, the instinct to run, to hide, to let them handle it while I cleaned up the mess. But then I looked at the list on my screen, the evidence of every time I had said yes and how it had been used against me. I turned the phone over in my hand before typing a reply. "I'll be there." I hit send, setting the phone down as dawn finally pushed through the rain, light touching the edges of my apartment. My reflection in the window looked back at me, older, sharper, but clear. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter, the blue light fading as the message delivered. Outside, the morning drizzle eased, leaving the city in a damp hush that felt like it was holding its breath with me. I stood there for a while, letting the quiet settle in, before moving to gather the folder I'd spent all night building, the one I had labeled Truth. I didn't bother with makeup or trying to look warm, pulling on a dark sweater and tying my hair back. I slipped the folder into my bag, zipped it closed, and stood by the door for a breath before leaving the apartment. The hallway smelled of brewed coffee from a neighbor's open door, and for a fleeting second, I wished I could step in and pretend I belonged to a family that only asked for a morning hello and nothing more. The drive to the house I grew up in was familiar, but it felt different now, like I was moving toward something final, a conversation I should have had years ago, but didn't know how to start. The rain had picked up again, the wipers brushing it away rhythmically as I turned onto their street. The porch light was on, the same light that once meant warmth, a welcome home. Now it felt like a stage light, waiting to reveal every lie and expectation I was tired of carrying. I parked along the curb, cutting the engine, letting the silence in the car weigh down the moment. I could see them inside through the window, moving around the kitchen, setting the table. Vera pulling out the plates I had bought for her birthday 5 years ago, Kieran's laughter too loud in the small space. I sat there until I felt my pulse settle, gripping the steering wheel once before letting go. When I stepped onto the porch, the third step creaked, and I paused, just like I always did, but this time I didn't feel the warmth it once brought. I rang the bell out of habit. Though the door opened almost immediately, Vera's face stretched into a smile too wide to be real. "There's my girl," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt like a net. "Come in, it's getting cold." The smell of garlic and rosemary floated from the kitchen, the table set with roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, the bread I liked from the local bakery. I saw it all, but it felt like a distraction, like a trap layered under familiarity. We sat, Vera across from me, Kieran at the head of the table, plates passed around with comments about how we needed to do this more often. I listened, nodding, letting them fill the silence until it was Kieran who cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. "May, listen," he started, his hands folding, unfolding, then folding again. "Things have been rough, and I'm close to losing everything, okay? I made some mistakes." Vera reached for his hand, dabbing at the corners of her eyes. "We can't let him go to jail, sweetie. He's your brother." I looked at the two of them. The rehearsed sadness, the pity plays, the way they were waiting for me to say what I always did. "Don't worry, I'll fix it." They didn't get that this time. I pulled the folder from my bag and placed it on the table, flipping it open so the paperwork, the credit reports, the forged signatures all faced them. Kieran's eyes flickered, Vera's hand paused mid-pat. "I know," I said, my voice steady. "I know about the loans, the forged papers, the debt you've stacked under my name." Vera gasped, a hand going to her chest. "Mayless, You don't understand. Kieran tried to laugh, leaning back. You're being dramatic, sis. It's family. We've always helped each other out. Help? I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice even. Help is when you ask. Theft is when you take. They both stilled, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in their confidence. You've always been the dependable one, Vera whispered, eyes wet now, shaking her head like I had disappointed her. That ends now, I replied. Vera's lips parted, and before she could speak again, something slipped. We did what we had to do to protect the house, May. We couldn't let them take it. We signed it over to Kieran to keep it safe. The words landed like a slap, but I didn't let it show. I sat back, inhaling, processing. The house I had helped pay off, every bonus check, every holiday where I skipped gifts so the mortgage could be covered, the place they promised would be ours, a family safety net. You signed it over to him, I repeated, the taste of betrayal bitter on my tongue, and didn't think I deserved to know. Kieran shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "It was for the family." I let the silence grow, the only sound the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then I stood, gathering my folder, my movements calm while the room felt like it was collapsing in on itself. I will not take on your debt. I will not go to prison for you, I said, looking at both of them, locking eyes with Vera, who looked older than she had a moment ago. You made your choices. Now I will make mine. Vera's eyes filled, tears slipping down her cheeks, her voice breaking. Malis, please. Behind her, Kieran's jaw clenched, his knuckles white on the table edge. His glare was the only honest thing about him in that moment. I turned, stepping away from the table, the smell of garlic and rosemary following me to the door. I paused once, looking back at them, seeing the fear, the desperation, the truth they had tried to keep hidden. Then I walked out, leaving the house that once was home, the voices of my mother and brother rising behind me, echoing down the hall as the door shut quietly at my back. The door clicked softly behind me, but the echo of their voices carried down the hall long after I walked away. I didn't rush to my car. I stood under the drizzle, letting it settle on my hair and shoulders, cooling the heat that had climbed my neck in that kitchen. My breath felt heavy, like I was pulling the weight of every promise I had ever made to them into my lungs and trying to let it out with each exhale. The drive back to my condo was quiet. The rain against the windshield was steady, keeping time with the slow beat of my heart that hadn't quite decided if it was breaking or hardening. The roads were empty, streetlights stretching into the distance, reflecting on the wet pavement like a reminder that everything looks different when it's wet and cold. My hands stayed tight on the wheel, remembering the tremor in Vera's voice and the way Kieran's eyes had sharpened when he realized I wasn't bending this time. When I reached home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood by the window, the city lights reflecting in the glass, merging with my reflection, making it hard to tell where the world ended and I began. I took off my coat, hung it carefully, and moved into the kitchen to make tea, the warmth of the cup grounding me as I sat at the small table that had seen more late-night work sessions than dinners with friends. I thought about the birthdays I spent alone, blowing out a single candle stuck in a store-bought cupcake, because there was always something urgent that needed my parents' attention. I remembered the vacation days I never took, the money I quietly handed over to help with family emergencies, all while I ate cheap noodles and skipped outings to make rent. I thought it was love. I thought it was what family did, and each memory now pressed into me, sharp and cold, leaving tiny cuts in places I didn't even know could hurt. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. "How could you do this to your mom?" Another ping. An aunt's number this time. "Family is supposed to help family, Malis." The notifications kept coming, each one a stone thrown at a window I was too tired to defend. I opened my social media and saw Kieran's post, a vague, pitiful message about family betrayal and being abandoned when you need people most. The comments underneath were filled with sympathy for him, people telling him to stay strong and family will always come around. My name wasn't there, but it didn't have to be. Everyone knew who the post was about. I set the phone down, turning off the notifications. I refused to let them claim any more of my peace, even if it was just for tonight. The knock at my door later that afternoon was sharp, impatient. I opened it to find a courier standing there, holding out an envelope with my name printed across it in bold letters. I signed, closed the door, and stared at the envelope before opening it with careful hands. Inside was a letter from a local attorney, claiming I owed my parents money for family loans, threatening small claims court if I didn't pay. The words blurred for a moment as I blinked back a sudden sting in my eyes. This was how far they were willing to go. They would rather destroy me publicly than face the mess they had enabled for Kieran. I sat down, the envelope and letters spread out on the table, breathing through the ache in my chest. For a brief, desperate moment, I thought about paying them off, just to make it stop, to silence the noise and the whispers and the accusations. But the thought of signing another check, erasing another piece of myself for their comfort, made something inside me harden. I stood, moving to my desk, pulling open the laptop, the screen lighting up the dark room. One by one, I opened folders, pulling emails, photos of checks, and messages, lining them up in a new folder I named Proof. Each file I dragged in felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they had taken for granted, a history they thought I would forget, moments they assumed I would never question. I organized the documents, scrolling through transactions I had justified for years, tracing the patterns of manipulation that had been masked as family needs. My hands were steady, my breathing even, as the quiet of the room settled around me, broken only by the clicking of the keys as I added dates and notes. When I was done, I closed the laptop, leaning back in the chair, letting my head fall against the cushion as I exhaled. My reflection in the dark window across the room was tired, yes, but I could see something else there too. A quiet promise in the set of my jaw, a determination in the calm that had replaced the tears. "They don't get to decide who I am anymore," I said aloud, letting the words fill the room. I stood up from the table, a quiet promise settling in my bones, knowing tomorrow I would start fighting back for the first time in my life. Morning came softly, creeping through the curtains with a pale gray glow that settled across the kitchen floor. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around me, a coffee cup cradled in my palms, the steam rising to touch my cheeks as I leaned against the counter, letting the warmth fight back the cold settling in my chest. I had made a promise to myself last night, and I intended to keep it. I picked up the demand letter and dialed the number printed beneath the attorney's letterhead. The line clicked before a receptionist's tired voice answered, transferring me to someone who introduced himself as handling the matter for Vera and Rayner. His tone was casual, too casual, and when I asked for documentation and the exact dates of these so-called loans, he stuttered, shuffling papers on the other end before saying, "We'll get back to you." He didn't sound like a man who had paperwork to back his threats. Hanging up, I placed the phone beside my coffee and let out a slow breath, steadying the tremor I could feel in my hands. I dressed for work carefully, choosing a navy blouse and slacks, something that would feel like armor. Driving into the office, I tried to let the rhythm of the windshield wipers drown out the memory of Kieran's smirk and Vera's pleading eyes. I parked, stepped into the lobby, and forced a small nod at the security guard, who nodded back, unaware of the small war following me through those glass doors. In the break room, I sensed it before I heard it. The low hush that falls when you walk into a room where your name was just spoken. A coworker, eyes flicking toward me, cleared her throat and shifted, turning away to whisper to another. I caught fragments. Family. Turned on her mother. Can you believe it? The words floating just loud enough to sting. It didn't take long to guess where the whispers started. Kieran's social media post, vague but pointed, had done its work, painting me as a daughter who turned her back when her family needed her most. I carried my coffee back to my desk, swallowing the tightness rising in my throat, forcing myself to focus on my screen as emails piled in. It was harder to ignore the memories that surfaced, the way Vera's face would turn cold when I questioned something, how Kieran would laugh it off, telling me I was too sensitive, too dramatic, that I didn't understand what family meant, the fear I used to feel when I was younger, terrified of disappointing them, crept back like a shadow, telling me to keep quiet, to let it go. But I was tired of letting it go. Just before lunch, my boss Odell walked by, pausing by my desk. Her gaze lingered on me, seeing past the polite smile I forced. "Coffee now?" she asked, and it wasn't really a question. I followed her to a quiet cafe across the street, the smell of roasted beans filling the air as we found a corner table. I hesitated, fingers wrapped tightly around the paper cup, before the words started to come out in pieces. The forged papers, the debts I didn't owe, the way my family was turning the narrative against me. Odell listened, her eyes steady, her hands folded on the table as she let me speak without interruption. Then when I finished, she took a slow sip of her coffee and nodded. "Families can be complicated," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I've been there, and let me tell you something, Melis. Blood doesn't give them the right to break you." She told me to retain an attorney immediately, one who wouldn't be intimidated by a family sob story, and to keep collecting every record, every receipt, every email that proved the truth. Then, with a small smile, she added that there was a position opening in the London office, a role that would suit me when I was ready to consider a clean start. For a moment, sitting there in that cafe, I felt something shift inside me, a sense that maybe I wasn't alone, that maybe there were people who would stand beside me simply because they saw me, not because they needed something from me. That afternoon, I returned to my desk with renewed focus, pulling documents into folders, taking screenshots, saving them to cloud drives. Each click felt like laying a brick in the wall I needed to build between their chaos and my peace. I unfriended Kieran on every platform, blocked numbers I recognized as extended family who had called to shame me, ignoring the pang that came with each block, reminding myself that boundaries were not cruelty. Later that night, the glow of the streetlights spilled into my kitchen as I set down a plate of reheated leftovers, my phone buzzing beside me. It was Vera. "If you don't help him, you'll regret it. Remember who took you in when no one else would." The message sat there, the words biting into me, reminding me of every guilt trip, every sacrifice I had made under the illusion of love. I looked at it for a long while, my thumb hovering over the screen, before I hit delete, watching the message disappear as quickly as it had arrived. I put my phone face down on the table, breathing steadily, realizing I was finally choosing myself. I sat there for a moment after putting my phone face down, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet of my condo as the world outside began its nightly hush. The decision to delete that message, to let silence be my answer, felt like the first breath of fresh air after being underwater too long. The next morning, I got dressed with a deliberate calm, pulling my hair back neatly, choosing a deep green blouse that made me feel solid. As I drove to work, the streets were still slick with rain from the night before, the sky overcast in that heavy Seattle gray that matched the steel in my chest. I stepped into the building, walked past people who either avoided eye contact or watched me too closely, and found my desk, booting up my computer without looking around. The whispers were still there, but they didn't sink into my skin like before. I felt the tremors of fear, but I let them pass through me, reminding myself that fear wasn't the same as weakness. I focused on the screen, on the numbers that made sense, on the quiet rhythm of my work. Each document I pulled and organized for the attorney Odell recommended felt like another stitch, mending the tear they had left in me. Odell stopped by my desk mid-morning, her hand resting on the cubicle wall as she leaned in. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly, her eyes direct, without pity. "Better," I said, and I meant it. "Remember," she added, "standing your ground doesn't make you difficult. It makes you free." By the time the day ended, I felt steadier, letting the momentum of quiet victories carry me back to the parking garage. The drive home was slow, traffic lights blinking yellow as I turned into my street, letting the radio fill the silence with soft guitar notes. I pulled into my spot, gathered my things, and walked up the stairs, my keys ready in hand. I glanced down the hallway and froze. Kieran was leaning against my door, arms crossed, face pale and drawn, hair sticking to his forehead like he had been running. For a moment, the hallway felt smaller, like the walls were leaning in, like I was 13 again, waiting for him to stop yelling. "Melis," he snapped as soon as he saw me, pushing himself off the door. "We need to talk." I kept walking, stopping just short of him, my hand on the lock, the cool brass grounding me. "Not here." He looked around, noticing a neighbor peeking from a cracked door, and lowered his voice, but his eyes were wild. "You're really going to do this to me? After everything I've done for you?" I turned the lock, opened the door, then stepped back outside, pulling it closed behind me so the neighbors wouldn't get the show he wanted. "Say what you need to say." "You need to fix this," he hissed. "They're coming after me, the IRS, the banks, everyone. You think you're better than family now?" I crossed my arms, pressing them tight to keep from shaking. "I'm not responsible for your choices." "You've always helped. What changed, huh?" He stepped closer, anger rolling off him in waves. "You think you're too good for us now?" Memories flashed, him yelling when Mom backed him, me being told to keep quiet, to keep the peace, to remember that he's your brother. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the desperation in the lines of his face, but it wasn't enough to make me fold. "You lied, Kieran. You forged my name. You stole from me. I won't take the fall for you." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "You think you can just walk away from this? You think they'll believe you? I'll drag you down with me if I have to." My heart pounded, fear clawing up my throat, but I swallowed it down. "Try," I said, voice steady. "I have proof. I have every receipt, every message. I'm not scared of you anymore." He stared at me, mouth opening, then closing, his hands clenching at his sides. "You'll regret this, Melis. When they come knocking, you'll wish you had helped." I took a breath, letting it out slowly, letting the fear burn off into something else. "I loved you enough to help you before. You loved me enough to use me. We're done." He took a step back, shaking his head, eyes darting as if looking for a way to salvage this moment, to spin it into another plea, another guilt trip. But there was nothing left for him to take. "You'll regret this when the police come for you too," he shouted as I turned away, his voice echoing down the hallway, bouncing off the walls like a final threat. I didn't look back as I unlocked the door, stepping inside, shutting it gently behind me. I locked the deadbolt, the soft click a promise to myself. I walked across the living room to the kitchen, pulling the folder of evidence off the counter, placing it in the center of the table under the light. This was no longer about saving them. This was about saving me. I carried the folder to the kitchen table, the hush of my condo wrapping around me as if it too was holding its breath. The weight of the evidence inside wasn't just paper and ink, it was every quiet betrayal I had swallowed for years. I placed it down, opened it, and let the truth breathe in the open air for the first time. I made myself a cup of coffee, steadying my nerves with the warmth against my palms, then picked up my phone and dialed the number Odell had given me. Carol answered on the third ring, her voice calm and measured. We spoke clearly, without embellishment, as I explained the forged documents, the threats, and the guilt that had bound me in silence. "Bring everything in," she said firmly. "We'll protect you." I drove to Carol's office under the steel-gray Seattle sky, raindrops sliding across the windshield as I repeated to myself that this was not betrayal. This was survival. I walked into her office, the smell of paper and faint lemon cleaner grounding me, and handed over the folder. She flipped through the documents, nodding, eyes sharp. "You're doing the right thing," she said, signing forms that would officially notify the IRS and local authorities of the forgeries, clarifying that I was a victim, not an accomplice. Each page I signed made my hand tremble, but with every signature I felt a chain loosen from around my chest. When it was done, Carol looked at me, her gaze unwavering. "You're free to go," she said softly. "And you are protected." Walking out of her office, I expected fear to creep back in, but all I felt was a quiet power that I had never known before. The air smelled different, like the sharp scent of rain when a storm finally passes, leaving the world cleaner. At home, I sat for a moment, letting the stillness settle. Then, I opened my laptop and set up a video call with the family. Faces popped onto the screen, uncles, aunts, cousins, their eyes suspicious, some angry, others simply curious. Kieran's face was there too, jaw tight, eyes narrowed. Vera sat beside him, clutching a tissue, looking up at me as if she were the victim. "Melis," she began, her voice cracking, "it's family. We need to talk." "No," I interrupted quietly but firmly. "You need to listen." I shared my screen, displaying the evidence clearly, bank statements, screenshots of messages, the forged documents with Kieran's handwriting. As I spoke, a hush fell over the group, some shifting uncomfortably, others unable to look away. Kieran tried to cut in, his voice rising in anger, but I muted him without hesitation. "I have spent my whole life saying yes," I continued, looking directly into the camera, into their living rooms, into the places where they had whispered about me behind closed doors. "Today, I'm saying no. This ends now." Vera's eyes welled with tears as she mouthed, "It's family, Melis." But the words held no power over me anymore. "I know," I replied softly, "and I'm done letting that be the excuse." For a moment, silence wrapped around the call like a blanket, heavy and undeniable. Then Kieran unmuted himself, his face flushed. "You think you're better than us? You think this makes you strong?" "No," I said, "this makes me free." He disconnected, the call ending abruptly on his side, leaving only the quiet of the others who had nothing left to say. I ended the call, closing the laptop gently. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock above the stove. I let the tears come then, not of guilt or fear, but of release, of a grief that was clean, without the tangle of shame that had always followed. I stood up to move around, letting the moment settle into my bones. My eyes fell on the handkerchief my mother had stitched for me years ago, the one that had once felt like love but now felt like a reminder of all the times I had been told to give more, to be quiet, to carry the family's burdens. I picked it up, running my fingers over the stitching of my name, and then folded it carefully, placing it in the donation box by the door. It was time to let it go, to let all of it go. My phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with a single message from Kieran. "You've ruined everything." I looked at it for a moment, feeling a pang of sadness for what could have been, then set the phone down and turned toward the window. The Seattle skyline was dark but calm, the rain finally easing into a drizzle, and for once, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The soft blue of dawn slipped through the blinds as I opened my eyes, the city still in that hushed breath before it fully woke. For the first time in weeks, I felt no weight pinning me to the bed, no dread clutching my chest before my feet touched the floor. I sat up, pulling the blanket around my shoulders, and reached for my phone on the nightstand. Missed calls, all from Mom. One message stared back at me. "Your brother's been arrested." I held the phone in my hand, the morning light reflecting on the screen, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I set the phone down instead, letting the quiet fill the space where panic used to live. I moved through the condo, each step measured, making coffee and opening the windows to let in the cool Seattle breeze. It smelled of wet pavement and a hint of ocean, reminding me that life goes on no matter how shattered it feels inside a single family. Carol had told me the investigation was progressing, but seeing those words, knowing Kieran would finally face the consequences, was a moment I hadn't fully prepared for. I thought of the family dinners, of Kieran laughing as Mom placed extra helpings on his plate while I quietly washed the dishes, paying the bills, holding the family together while they never noticed I was the glue. Now, the glue had let go. I showered, dressed, and found myself pulling out the lasagna dish from the cabinet, the one I had carried to so many Sunday dinners, hoping it would earn love that never came. I ran my fingers along the rim, the cool glass grounding me in the present. I placed it on the counter next to the handkerchief Mom had stitched my name into when I was just a teenager, the fabric soft from years of being held during moments I needed to swallow words I couldn't say. They were just objects, but for so long they had felt like proof that I was a good daughter, a good sister, a good everything. I realized now they were just pieces of the past I no longer needed to carry. The phone buzzed again, a news alert confirming that Kieran had been formally charged with fraud and tax evasion. It stated the evidence, the forged documents, and the mounting debt he had tried to bury under my name. Mom and Dad had lost their house to cover legal fees, moving in with a cousin in Idaho. The fallout had arrived. I felt no triumph, just a clean, quiet sadness. There was a version of me that would have taken this moment and spiraled into guilt, believing I had destroyed my family. But as I looked around my small but peaceful home, I saw the truth clearly. I had saved myself, and that was enough. I placed the lasagna dish and the handkerchief in a box marked for donation. Before sealing it, I took a photo of the dish, a reminder not of pain, but of the journey it had carried me through. From a woman who couldn't say no to one who finally did. "Thank you for teaching me when to stop saying yes," I whispered, taping the box shut. I drove it to the donation center, the box sitting in the passenger seat like a quiet companion. At the drop-off, I handed it over, watching as it was placed with other boxes, a small part of me leaving with it, but a larger part returning home unburdened. That afternoon, Odell called as I was making tea, her voice warm with a smile I could almost hear. "The London position is yours if you want it," she said. "No pressure, but if you're ready, it's waiting." I looked out the window, the skyline etched against a pale sky, and felt a smile form. "I don't want to run," I told her, my voice steady, "but I think I'm ready to grow." That evening, I took a walk by the water, the breeze cool on my face, the waves lapping softly against the pier. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange, a reminder that endings can be gentle too. I thought about what it had cost me to choose myself. It was not a clean break or an easy victory. It was a wound that would heal slowly, leaving a scar to remind me of the lesson I had learned too late, but learned nonetheless. As I turned to head home, I felt a sense of peace wrap around me, the kind that comes when you know you did what you had to do, even if it wasn't what others wanted. Sometimes the family you fight to keep will never fight for you, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away even if it breaks your heart. I chose myself, and that was enough.